crystal pouches today. So if you did not see my vlog, check it out. That's where I got some of my, or actually all of my fabric that I'm going to be using. I went thrifting and just found some old scarves and things that I'm going to be using for my fabric for these crystal pouches to make them super inexpensive and really kind of fun and unique. So I have 3 different styles of pouches that we will be making today. The first one is this tassel pouch, and I was able to make this because I had a scarf with tassels. You could add tassels onto it as well, but this one is relatively simple, but you do just have to work with what you've got as well, and it just has a single cinch tie. So that's the first one I'll show you. The second one here is this sort of little triangle pouch that I use, and this actually has a double cinch like this, and it is a little bit longer if you have larger crystals or herbs and things you're trying to hold in here. So that's the second one, and then the third one is actually our most simple one, smallest one as well, also with a double cinch, but just a rectangle folded under on the bottom, and then our double cinch on top. So those are our 3 pouches that we will learn how to make today. So some things that you guys are going to need for this is I'm using my sewing machine, but you could also hand sew this as well. So if you just had a needle and thread, that would work just fine. I am just going to speed up the process by using my sewing machine, but you could definitely do this by hand sewing as well. So of course, needle and thread, sewing machine if possible. You're definitely going to need pins to pin your stitches together where you want to sew. You're going to need a pair of nice shears, sewing shears that will be able to cut the fabric in a very clean way. And then you will probably want something to measure your fabric with if you want to follow my instructions, or you can come up with your own as well. And then just whatever fabric you want. Obviously, I have a handful of different scarves that I found that I'm going to be using. So it just kind of depends. You probably have some scrap fabric lying around at home that you can use as well to make this really inexpensive. And then I just have some cording that I'm going to be using for the ties. And then I do also have some gold cording too. I'm just gonna, I might use this as well, just depending on the look of it. I thought that might be a fun touch. And then I do also have some thinner cording that I actually use for my beading, but I have this, let me see if it will focus on it for you, but it's very thin, and all my beads can fit on this if I want to add some detailing with some beads on the outside too. And like I said, you could use whatever you'd like. You could also use leather cording, other different types of things like that. You could also make a really simple pouch that doesn't even cinch close, and you just wrap a tie around the top and keep it tied like that. So anyway, and then this is what I'm sort of using. This is just an organza pouch that I use actually for my shop. But this is what I'm going to be basing my pattern on. And if you can see, it's just one piece folded up in half like this. And then they folded over the 2 top pieces to make this spot here where the ribbon goes through. Oh, and you could obviously use ribbon like they have here too. That would be really pretty. And to make a little tube where the ribbon goes through, and then obviously it's just stitched up on the side. So it's super simple, and this is what I'm going to use as sort of my base. I'm probably going to make, I want mine to be a little smaller than this, but this is what I'm going to use for my sort of template for what I'm making, just to give you an idea of where we're going here. All right, so let's get started. I'm gonna start with this scarf fabric that I found. I think it's gonna be the easiest one to use because the other ones are silk, or at least some sort of blend that's like silk. So I'm gonna start with this one first and see where we go. I think they all are gonna be a little bit different. This one does have tassels on it, which I wanna use. So this one is gonna be a little bit different pattern than the other ones because I wanna be able to use the tassel part on the end. So I'm going to move forward with this one, and then I'll show you guys all of the rest of them and sort of my process, and the measurements will be in the video. So if you guys want to make these yourself, you can go right ahead and do that. Cool, let's get started. of what I'm working with, like I said, I want to make that mine a little bit smaller actually for this one. So I actually would like the pouch itself. This pouch is about 7 inches, just a hair under. I actually want my pouch to be about 4. And since I'm not really sewing anything, I'm just going to sew this straight across so I can keep the tassels. I'm not going to flip it inside out like you normally would. I don't really need to add any extra there. So that's about, so that's 4 inches there. So that's actually how big my pouch is going to be. And then for the top portion, I want to have about 1 inch where this portion will be on top, above the little cinch. And since that has to fold over, I need to double that. So we're going to do 6 inches, and I'm going to give myself just a little bit of extra wiggle room. So I'm going to give myself 6.5. And that's where I'm going to make my cut. So that's 3.5 inches wide. And see, I can just use this, since this is striped, I can just use this to make sure that it's straight. So I've got 3.5 inches, and then I'm going to measure up 6.5 inches. And that's where I'm going to make my cut across. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to fold over the top so I can make the area where the cinch will be, and then we will sew up the side and sew the bottom and close everything up. So since this is the outside, we're gonna fold to the inside, and here's where your measuring tape will come in handy. I want this to fold over about 1 inch. And this is where it's really handy to have an iron so you can press this. I actually don't have an iron, but I do have a steamer. So I'm going to heat up my steamer, and I'm gonna press this with the steamer. So then it's really easy for me to make this stitch here. All right, so I've got my first pouch steamed here. Like I said, you could iron it. You could also pin it with pins. I don't think I'm actually going to pin this one. I think it's gonna be easy enough to just do a quick little stitch across. Like I said, you could definitely sew this by hand, but I'm just gonna use my machine to make it nice and easy. I am just using a simple straight stitch on this. You could do zigzag if you wanted to. Just be careful to make sure you leave enough room on the width here to be able for your cord to go through to be able to cinch it closed. And I'm just using black thread for all of my pouches here. I just find that that's the easiest to use for everything. You're not really gonna see much of the stitching, and I just always have that in my machine. Most of my clothes are black, so if I need to use that for any type of alteration or things like that, it's just easy. So I'm going to use black. Like I said, you could match thread if you want. For multicolored fabrics, it's hard to do, so usually darker ones are easier. Okay, so I'm just going to line this up on my machine and make sure that I have enough width here on the opposite side of the foot to make sure that I have enough room for my threading. And I'm just going to make sure that this width between this side of the foot and this side of the fabric stays the same the whole time to make sure that it's nice and even on the top, since my cut is not perfect. And I'm just going to go backwards a few stitches just to secure that stitch all the way to the end. I'm going to go past, and then I'm going to come back through. And I'm just doing the same thing on the other end, just securing that stitch to make sure that it doesn't come undone. All right, so that is what it looks like. As you can see, my cut was not perfect there, but now you have a stitch there for your cinch to go through. Okay, so now what I realized is I should have finished this end, this raw edge, before I sewed this one closed. So I'm just gonna pull these stitches out really quick. It'll take just a second. I'm gonna finish that edge, and then I'll just complete that stitch there. So I'm just gonna pull this out. All right, I've got my free edge steamed here. Make sure that my tassels stay out of the way and don't get sewn. So I'm gonna just sew down this free edge, and then I will re-sew that one more stitch just to close off where the cord will go. Sometimes when you sew a free edge, it might be helpful to do a zigzag stitch. I thought about it with this only because the stitching is, or the fabric itself, the stitching is loose. But I think that this is gonna be okay. Just based on how this stitch went, I think that the single stitch is gonna be fine. And it'll also show a lot less on the outside of the pouch. The zigzag you would see much more. All right, so here's where it's a little tricky since I've already done that stitch. Like I said, normally you would do that first. But I think we can make this work. Perfect. That looks great. So now, as you can see, that fraying free edge is now all sealed off and clean for me to finish that last stitch. So I'm just going to reline that up where my initial stitch was. And then I'm just gonna meet my initial stitch, boom. And to seal that, we'll just reverse and go over that spot just a couple times just to make sure we're good. So you can see that's where the little thick part is on the stitch, kind of right on this purple and pink area, but pretty much unnoticeable on the other side just because there already is black, and we'll trim those little guys there. All right, so now we are ready to sew up our sides and the bottom. All right, so I'm gonna sew up the side first, and then we will sew across the bottom. Since the bottom is gonna have our tassels, I'm gonna do that last. So my pouch is flipped inside out now, as you can see the raw stitching here. So I'm gonna start at the top because I actually wanna leave this open here so our cinch can still come through. So I'm gonna start at the top, and then just because of the way this scarf is, there was a little extra fabric on this side because it was actually longer in the corner just from how they stitched it. So I'm gonna actually start there to make sure that it stays even on the bottom and then also on the top. So I've just folded a little portion over there just to make sure that it stays even. And of course you could be using your pins here. I just end up finding that it's just quicker to just use your hand and make it work. Alright, so we've stitched up this side, and like I said, we've just stopped right before so that our cord can still come through here. And since we want the tassels on the outside, we're gonna flip our pouch back to the right way so that our tassels still stick out. All right, we are all lined up at the bottom. Our tassels are out of the way. And we're just gonna stitch straight across the bottom, and that will keep our little cute tassels there. And then we just need to do our cord at the top. Our pouch. We'll just trim some of these little threads on the outside here, and then we'll get our cording. All right, so I've got my cord here. I've got a piece of painter's tape, and then I'm just using the cap to my seam ripper. I'm gonna use this like a little needle, obviously not sharp so it won't poke any of my work, and I'm gonna send this through. And since that's a lot bigger, it's a lot easier to work its way through. Now, obviously you could have threaded this through before you sewed it, but for me, I always worry about potentially sewing the cord in there, so I just do it this way. And there, we're through. This is why I use the painter's tape too. It doesn't leave any residue on anything. It's not sticky. There's our little cinch for our pouch. So you can tie this off in a lot of different ways. You could put beads on here. I'm just gonna do a simple knot at the end. So then when you want to close this, you'll just tie it with a bow, or even just a knot like that would work too. So that is our first crystal pouch. So we are on to version number 2 for the DIY crystal pouches. So what I'm thinking for this one, because of the way that the pattern is on this scarf, is actually I'm going to make my pouch come to a point at the bottom. So I'm going to use, and then it'll be the same on each side if I take these two corners together. So what I'm going to do is, since I want this to be the bottom of the pouch and this to be the top of the pouch, is I'm actually going to cut 2 straight lines here, and then the pouch will come up. And then we'll meet at the top. So this is actually going to take, we're gonna have to cut, we're gonna have to sew every single side on this one based on this design. But I think it's gonna end up looking really cool because we'll have this little like triangle design at the bottom, which will be kind of cool. So again, we're gonna start with measuring. So if we do 8, then my folds will start here, and then I can still have this like triangle part on there with that little bit of blue sticking out. So I'm gonna measure 4 inches over, and that's where I'm gonna take my vertical cut in on each side. So 4 inches there, 4 inches there, and then I'm gonna make my vertical cut here. Okay, so I did decide to pin my fabric here just because it is very silky and smooth, and I don't want to mess up my cuts here. So again, I'm gonna measure in 4 inches. The 4 is at the top there. To these cuts. So this is the beginnings of our pouch. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take the pins out since we've made our cuts, and now since this is actually the outside, we're going to flip so that the 2 outsides are facing each other, and that's how our pouch will end up going together. So what we need to do first is we need to sew our outside edges closed, at least at the very top here, so we can make our cinch. So what I'm going to do, since these edges are already closed from just the actual scarf itself, is I'm going to close these edges on these 2 pieces, and then we will sew our tubing for the cord to go through, and then we'll sew everything up. Okay, I have both of my pieces. They have been pinned on the sides, and then I did steam them a little bit to keep them that way. And I'm just gonna sew down the sides. I don't really need to go all the way down because I really just need it at the top here where I'm gonna fold over, but I think I am gonna go all the way down just to give it a little bit more security. So then when we do sew the 2 pieces together, we've got a little more security on the sides. So both pieces are ready to go here. And so I'm gonna sew those up. So same process as before, just starting out and then going back and forth. You do have to be careful with these very thin silky fabrics, they tend to bunch up on you really easily, just because they are so thin. So just be careful with that. Obviously make sure you're pulling your pins out as you go. So just pause, pull your pin out. Once you get a little bit more on the end though, you can just hold it taut and you shouldn't have any problems with bunching up. There we go. There's one side. And we'll just move to the next. So that is one side finished. So we're just gonna do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so we have our sides stitched up. I've got my two front sides facing each other right now. And now I just am trying to make sure I have everything lined up as best I can to make sure that these stay even. And then I'm folding over our tube piece here to make where our cinch will go through. And so I'm just gonna pin it once on each side and match the other side because I don't want one side to be longer than the other side. It's gonna end up making it difficult in the long run. So once again, I'm just going to make sure that these match up before we start sewing. All right, so now we will go ahead and stitch across here to make our tube for our cinch. And so the biggest thing here is, since you have two pieces, is you just want to make sure that the width from the top to the bottom here is going to be the same on both of them so that not the tubes on each side are equal. So we'll just measure that on our machine here as we sew. So I'm going to keep my edge of my fabric here lined up on my furthest line here. And that's going to ensure that it will be the same for both sides of the pouch. There we go. So there's our first stitch. And we'll do the other one. So again, we're just lining up in that same exact spot where we were lined up for the other one. And there's our other one. So that is the beginnings of our two pieces of our pouch. And I'm realizing right now it's looking totally like a tie, so I'm hoping it doesn't end up looking like a tie, but either way, I still really like this pattern, and I think it's gonna be cool because I want to put some sort of like fun like leather details and stuff on here too maybe. So okay, so these are the two back sides of our pouch. So what we're going to do is face the two front nice sides together, and we are going to now sew starting at the very base of our cinch stitch here, all the way down, across, down, all the way up, back up to the base of this cinch. So again, like the other pouch, we'll have these two open spots here where our cinch cord will come through. Now I'm gonna put a couple pins in here. And so this way, we're just going to ensure that we're at least checking in to make sure we are on track pretty much at these 3 corners at the base. And so the other thing to be mindful of when you are stitching here is that you don't want any of this seam here to show on the outside. So you're going to want to stitch inside these outer stitches where we sewed that. So then when you pull it open, you're not seeing any of those inner stitches. So just be mindful of that as you are stitching as well. And you know what? Maybe for good measure, we'll just throw one just on the top here for ourselves, just to hold everything together. So that's how I have mine pinned, and I'm just gonna start here and work my way around. Making sure we're staying lined up. And now when you get to this corner, I think I wanna go a little further down so I don't miss out on that part of the pattern. So now I'm gonna lift up. And now my foot's gonna be outside here, but I have a different stitch here that was from the original pattern, and I don't wanna lose these blue dots, or I don't wanna lose the orange dots on the blue. I want that to stay as part of my, and I'm just checking underneath to make sure I'm still catching my other piece there. Same thing, I'm gonna lift my foot, turn on the corner. And now this one, because of the way this scarf, it was actually a little bit crooked, but I want to make sure that my pattern stays even. See how there's more blue on this side? I'm gonna stay lined up with my blue dots and continue to stitch in that same spot so it's even on both sides. So for me, there's gonna be more overhang there, but it's gonna be more even as far as the pattern goes. And I'm stopping right before my stitch there. Perfect. We've got all of our stitching there, so now we can open our pouch and see how it turned out. So I'm just pushing out each of the corners that we sewed to give them definition. Oh, so cute. And see how I kept those dots there? Otherwise we would have lost that in the pattern. So I'm really glad that that's still there. So now all we need to do is just put our cinch in here, and that will cinch it right up for us. I'm gonna use the same cording that I used before. We'll do the same thing we did before. And I'm just gonna use the same piece of tape, tape it to my little cover for my seam ripper. Like I said, whatever you have that works for you will be just fine. The silk ones will actually be even easier to thread through. Alright, so I've strung the cord through, and if you can see, I have a loop on each side and 2 ends on each side. So that's because these 2 ends are looping around to this side, and these 2 ends are looping around to this side, and that is how you get your cinch. So then I'm just going to tie the ends together so they don't go back through. And that means that this pouch is done. Now you could add different decoration to it if you wanted to add like other beads or things like that on. You could even put like leather or something, tassels, things like that. You could sew other things on the sides and stuff like that, but that's just a base for you guys to start with. Alright, so this is the last pattern that we're gonna do. So this is our third template, and this one's going to actually be the easiest one, really nice and simple. This one would probably be the easiest one to do if you were hand sewing, and you could use this for any type of fabric, but again, I'm using some more silky fabric, not the easiest fabric to hand sew, but just whatever you find or have on hand would be the best. So pretty much all this one is going to be is just folded up here. I'm probably going to cut right here, and then all we'll need to do is we'll need to sew our free edge, do our fold over for our cinch, and then just sew up the side. So super simple. And I'm also going to measure this one again so you guys have the measurements if you want to do the same exact size. From the top to the bottom is 5.5. And so like I said, 2 inches of that is going to be our fold over for our cinch. I'm going to try to keep that maybe a little bit smaller for this one because I do want to still have some of this black at the top and the bottom here like this. And then width-wise, I'm going to try to pick sort of an area that I like the pattern. So I kind of like the pattern right here. So I'm probably going to do, I think we'll do 4 wide, and then that will give us enough room on the side to fold over and sew up. So basically 4 by 5.5, and we're just going to do a rectangle, and that's what we're going to do for this specific fabric. And I'm not using the very edge of this just because there's this black here which I don't want, and I specifically like this area of the pattern. And I'm going to give us a little bit of the fuchsia so we can have that to fold over. That'll give us a little bit more black to work with to keep the black on the top. Alright, so that's our piece. I'm going to start with just sewing this free edge. And I'm going to pin, and we'll do a little steam on it. Alright, so we're just going to sew this free edge. It's already been pinned and just steamed slightly. Sometimes when the fabric is really flimsy like this, I just do a little stitch there, cut it, and then start my stitch again. Just tends to work out a little bit better. You don't get a bunch of bunching on the end then. There we go. We've got that free edge stitched now. So now our 2 ends are exactly the same. Alright, now that we have this free edge sewn here, I want to sew the side free edges. We really only need it at the very top because that's where the cinch is going to be, like you've seen on the past ones. But we could go all along the whole side if we wanted to. We would lose some space there, so I think I'm just going to do the top. And that will be enough for us. So I pretty much just need to go through the black on each sides, and that will be enough. And then these will end up getting sewn when we fold that over. They'll get sewn together anyway. So all I'm going to do is just stick a pin in each one of these. We've got each corner steamed and pinned and ready for us just to sew that free edge down. Just gonna go a hair past the black on the pattern just for good measure, but that will be enough. Alright, so we have each corner sewn there where we are going to fold over. Alright, so then we are going to fold over to create our little tube for our cinch, just like that. Alright, so now I'm just going to sew across here and here to make our tubes, and then then what we'll do is we'll just fold it inside out and sew up the sides there, and we will be almost done. All right, so we just sewed across there. So now we've made our tubes here for the cinch to go through. So now I've flipped it inside out. And so all I need to do is sew up each side and then stop before I get to the little cinch holes. And then this one is done once we put our cinches in. All right, I've got my sides pinned here. I did just decide to fold those in a little bit just to match this so it didn't get too bunchy here where we had already folded in for this top seam. And then I'm just gonna sew straight down each side and then we'll put our little finishing touches on. So I just want to start right where our seam is here for the top. Don't want to sew over our little tubes that we made. And there's our little pouch. So now all we need to do is make our cinch, and we will do our cinch exactly the same way we did our cinch for the other one. And we'll just send a loop around this way, so we'll have a loop around this way, so we'll have 2 threads coming out this way like that, and then a loop around this way, so we have 2 threads coming out like that. So you basically have 2 loops going like this, and then you can cinch them on the sides. Alright, so I've got one through, as you can see. We've got our loop on this side and then the 2 ends here. So I just used my piece of painter's tape. And so you're gonna want to, and just made a little needle. So you're gonna want to start on the end. You already have your loop on. There we go. And then you're gonna want to just keep on going around. So then you make your loop on this side. And then to finish these off, we are just gonna tie them as close as we can to the end so that they don't start to unravel. There you go. So that is the simplest form of the crystal pouch you can do.